Oh, what's up, Jason?
Oh, buddy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Ask the Experts. Gain insights in usage and performance of your Power BI reports to increase adoption and reduce costs. That is a mouthful. And if you watch the on-demand session, really this is about admin-related items to gain insights into usage and adoption inside of Power BI. So thank you so much for attending this session. I know it's really early for some folks. If you're in Europe, it's a perfect time. If you're in the US, it's very early. So real quick, before we get into this, I'm Adam Saxon. I'm a PM on the Power BI product team. I work with our largest enterprise customers. It's on the customer advisory team called the CAT team. And we basically help unblock customers with adoption and usage of Power BI. And I'm joined with Jason Himmelstein, who's going to help moderate today's session. So he is part of the BI Focal podcast and just a great guy. And so thank you, Jason, for helping out today.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure.
Doing up things and making sure everyone is tame and well behaved. I appreciate it. Speaking of that, how to engage us. So use the chat area use the Q&A functions to ask your questions. I'm going to ask that it try and stay on topic. We've already seen a few. I've already seen a few questions that are not necessarily related to the session that this Ask the Expert session goes with. So in terms of the admin and the usage and adoption. And so we will try and get to those. Jason's going to be queuing up those questions. We're going to try and stay on topic. If we do have extra time, then we will go ahead and grab some of those extra questions as well. All right, and also make sure to upvote the questions that you're interested in, because that'll give us signals for which ones to try and get to. And what else? So etiquette. So this session is being recorded, and so don't spam questions. Once the question's there, it's we'll see it, and then also adhere to the Microsoft Code of Conduct. So basically, be nice to everyone. So just know that. All right. With that, Jason, let's get to the questions.
All right, let's do it. Adam, you have a lot of fans out here that are saying nice things. Let's look for some here that are on topic for this specific, conversation. And there's one here from Dane. There are some pretty good tools for capacity admins to look at the consumption and performance of reports. Any plans to bring that ability down to the workspace report owners so they can tune their content?
So why am I not? Oh, there it is. So wow, these things are going really fast. Where is? Oh, you
I threw it into published.
Yeah. So there are always improvements to the metrics and whatnot. I think one of the biggest things, and this was talked about in the session, is the ability to use Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics for capturing some of that information. The report for the workspaces is going to be that updated usage metrics item, which will that's enabled for the workspaces. Today, that is a preview option, so you can opt into that. That gives you that information for usage of the report, as well as it has performance-related information as well. And so I think that report is going to be the item for the workspace admins to gain insights into that performance metrics. From the capacity admin piece, I know you're talking about kind of the breakdown of the refreshes and the actual queries, things of that nature. There's no plans currently for that report to be improved to that degree of information. Now, what I will say back to the Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics, the long-term goal is for that information to be available in that dump of data into Log Analytics, which means that you'll potentially be able to expose that information to workspaces on your own. And so that data will be available at some point. There's also going to be some template reports that come as part of that. So keep your eye on that, and maybe you can tweak that and add on to it based on the data that's there. So good question.
All right, I just published another question here from John. So watch the presentation. Thanks for doing that. It all sounds great, but is there any recommendation regarding a preferred approach for collecting administration and monitoring data that is either not on the roadmap yet or far down the roadmap?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the items that are available today So that is the audit log information that we can get from Office 365 management APIs or PowerShell, like was talked about in the session. The other thing that we do have is the Power BI Capacity Metrics app. And that is not, there's no direct download of that information. And so in terms of the performance information, there's no way for you to directly capture that. What I have seen some customers do with the Capacity Metrics app is they will go into Analyze in Excel and kind of extract it that way. It's not the most elegant way to do it, but I have seen customers do it if it's premium related. If it's not premium related, you just don't have, there's no way to get that information. So unfortunately, no. But again, that's why the focus is on this long term of getting that information into Azure Monitor so that it is available for you to work with and gain insights off of that. So good question.
All right, so I published another question here, and there's one here from Daniel Christian. I'll let you get to in your own time. Okay. But there's one here from Grayson, and I'm going to apologize in advance, folks, if I mispronounce your names. I'm going to do the best I can. Do you have any tips on optimizing BI performance for use in projects where where bandwidth is very low, e.g., remote locations?
So that's interesting, and also I'm gonna make a lot of assumptions here because I don't know what the context is around the optimizing performance. So are we I'm going to assume that what you mean is when we have remote locations, is it on the consumption side? Is it on the data refresh side? So let me tackle both really quick. On the consumption side, the more simplistic the report, the better it's going to be. Meaning that the more visuals you have, it's going to require the more queries to the back end, and so that's going to result in a lot more back and forth between the browser and the service. If we're talking about data refresh, from a refresh perspective, I've always preached that you want to reduce internet latency, and so if there is a lot of hops on that refresh, then it's going to take more time, right? So get the gateway as close to the data source, make sure that we're regionally close to where the data source is. So maybe that's multi-geo premium, maybe it's, some other items that are there. So again, keep focused on the latency and try and reduce that as much as possible. I don't know if that answered your question, but there it is.
All right, and you do have the ability, folks, to go back in and reply to your comments as well, and I'm doing the best I can to try and answer them. Adam, I've published a couple more in here as we've gone, so I think Daniel's is still out there for you to answer, but I'm going to leave that one.
Yeah. Thinking about that one.
Yeah, Stuart said great presentation, by the way, so always good
Appreciate
to have kudos
that,
for you. Michael asks, having a COE approach within the Power Platform, we'd like to enrich this data with the Power BI report data like premium capacity consumption, ODG usage also. I'm assuming that meant also. Where could we gather those details from? LA only.
So again, that's a great question, Michael. So that goes to that long-term plan of the Log Analytics Azure Monitor piece, because today some of that, and that's the challenge today, right, is some of that information is in different locations and or just not even available for you. And so the goal is to get all of that centralized into one spot to where then you've got the data, you can control the timeline of how much retention you have, and then build reports on top of that or integrate based on all of that data together. So, and I will tell you that the log analytics piece and the ability for all that information, once that plan is realized, it's going to be bananas.
Good drop. There
you go, Daniel.
All right, so. As we're going along, I'm not deleting these questions, folks. So feel free to remember you can comment back in if you want to. But so Adam, if you want to sort of scroll down a little bit, we can grab the next one here from Jessica Jolly.
Jessica, good to see you.
Would you say that usage and performance monitoring are primarily the owner of the workspace's responsibility than the admin's responsibility? Great question.
Yes, and my answer is yes. to both, right? It's both responsibility. So as a workspace admin, and also I would add that it's also the report author's responsibility as well. So they all have a piece of play in the overall performance and health. So from a report, the creator perspective, whoever created that report and data set, it's their responsibility to make sure that their item performs well, right? From a workspace perspective, it's their responsibility to make sure everything in that workspace is playing well and, is performing and, maybe not starving out other items, to just keep tabs on that. And then obviously from an admin perspective, a tenant admin and or capacity admin, it's their responsibility also to have a holistic understanding of what's going on between the different workspaces, and then make sure that those are playing well together, and that we don't have a bad actor or something of that nature. So, and that's the big thing with Premium today is, you could have a report that you tested on your own, it performs great, and then you put it into Power BI Premium, and it's not good. And so we just need to be mindful of that on all aspects. So from the report creator perspective, they may find like, oh, this actually works pretty good. But once they get it to the service, it doesn't. And so that's where those different players all have responsibility in that aspect. So, yep.
All right. So the next one here is from Donald Parrish. We found that log analytics captures everything and quickly builds up in cost. Fairly small, but we're now saving to storage instead. And I plan to summarize in an Azure Data Factory on way to Power BI usage report. Any comment?
Good to see you, Donald. So I have this conversation a lot with customers, and there's general frustration, like the limits we have today on the different aspects that we have. So whether it's the audit log or it's the capacity metrics apps, like all these different items have different windows of data availability. So the metrics app is 7 days. The audit log data, depending on how you got it, has a different time window. And so the challenge there is people want more than that. Well, if you want more than that, you have to store it somewhere, right? And so what's going to be happening with the Azure Monitor and Azure Log Analytics, yes, it's going to be a lot of data, especially if you're a larger enterprise organization. It's going to be even more data, right? So it's up to you to manage what's actually there. So now the beauty of this, though, is yes, Power BI is going to be pumping that to Azure Log Analytics, and then you can do with it as you want. So if you only want 60 days to be stored in the log analytics, that's fine. That just means if you want longer retention, you would have to extract that and then put that somewhere else, whether that's an on-prem storage location, maybe it's a blob storage from a file perspective. So you have that option, right? And then you can limit the actual time window on the log analytics capture that Power BI is pumping to. So that retention in the log analytics is completely up to you. And then if you want to do something else with that data, it's there. So do with it as you will. If you want to retain it somewhere else, or keep it in the log analytics and deal with the cost on that aspect, that's up to you. So from what we found is we wanted to provide a central location that's accessible for most everyone. The other thing is because of Kusto queries and whatnot, like that's actually what we use behind the scenes on the Power BI side. So we know it scales. So we're not worried about that aspect of it. But what you do past that is entirely up to you, and there's so many options there.
All righty. Awesome. So great answer there. The next one has a question about price in it, but I think that there's a couple of other pieces to it as well. And I know price is always one of those things that is hard to comment on unless something's public, right? So, but Nikki asks, and Nikki, I apologize, I'm not going to even try to mispronounce your last name here. Are you reading the question already, Adam? Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
All right. Great on-demand session, Adam. And is that the real reason why you like that? I like that. It's always good to get the kudos for the presenters. I have a few questions. So I also have difficulties getting a decent overview of our whole tenant. It just has so many different parts to look at. Okay. And we also use Premium. So I like Azure monitoring. Is there a price for that to be announced for that? Or is it included in another license already? Is the sliding window going to change a line for all the products?
Yep.
Example, up to 7 days for the metrics app or up to 90 days for the Power BI commandlets. And where can I opt in for the new usage metrics?
So, great question. So here's the overall premise. What we're going to do once we actually have once the Azure Monitor Log Analytics items are available, basically it's on and it's dumping data basically with a 5-minute latency, and it's just going to go. And from a log analytics perspective, so the log analytics account is tied to your Azure subscription. That pricing is already publicly available. You're paying for log analytics or Azure Monitor. It's not part of Power BI cost. It's not part of your pro licenses or premium licenses. It is an additional cost. Like, you have to pay for that storage and the use of that service. From what we've seen on our end, from a cost perspective, it's probably some of the more minimal costs compared to other options, right? And so there is cost there. Go check out the costing for, I actually don't know what that costing is off the top of my head. I'd have to go look at the Azure portal to go see what that is. And then in terms of how much is there, everything's going to be in the same time window from that. In terms of the information will be dumped with a 5-minute latency across the different metric points that are exposed through that avenue. In terms of how much data is actually going to be there, that's up to you. You control the latency on that. So if you only want 30 days to be in that log, this goes back to the previous question of, how do we maybe extract it to somewhere else because we don't want to keep it in log analytics because of the cost. That's up to you. That's entirely up to you. So if you want 30 days of data and then you know what the cost is going to be for that, that's what you've got. If you want 2 years worth of data, you'll understand what the cost is for that. So that's something you're going to have to play with in terms of, and also how much cost there and how much data is going to be there. That's up to the organization and how much activity and things of that nature. So for a large enterprise customer, it's going to be a lot more data than maybe a smaller business that's using Power BI with maybe like 3 or 4 people. So I hope that answers your question, Nikki.
All right, I have just published a whole bunch more questions in here for you, Adam. So
awesome.
Coming up from the bottom, the next one is from an anonymous submitter.
Thank you, Anonymous.
Any plans to allow GA to admin workspace properly? Right now, unless you are a workspace owner, there's not much you can do. Example, users leave the company and their workspaces remain, and we have to have Microsoft remove them or assign another owner if reports are being used.
So if I'm thinking about this correctly, we're talking about if we have an app workspace, so the non-my workspace, and only a single person was part of that, and we leave, then you're saying you have to call Microsoft to add another owner in there. That's not true. For the app workspaces, a tenant admin can actually inject another admin into that workspace. They can do that through the admin portal, through the workspace area, and you can actually edit the access list for the V2 workspace, so the new workspace experience. That's true. If you're still using the classic workspaces, which will you should be moving off of those, that is controlled through the Office 365 Modern group, and so the global admins and whatnot would have to help with that. If you're referring to the My Workspace, that is true, and so there's no way for a given tenant admin or Power BI admin to get access to that My Workspace directly, which is also why I say don't publish production information to a My Workspace. It should go to an app workspace. And I would also add that my recommendation from a best practice is have more than one person as an admin of the app workspace, or get a central, like the IT group, that they have a security group, and make sure that that's an admin of the workspace as well. But tenant admins can either global admins or Power BI admins can inject users into the app workspace, either through the admin portal in Power BI or through PowerShell.
All right, very cool. So if you have submitted a question. It hasn't been published yet. I've just asked our awesome producer to go ahead and publish a link for you to actually be able. Yeah, we've got 41 questions and only 30 minutes for Adam to answer them. So there's going to be a link showing up out there that you'll be able to go ahead and submit those questions for us to be able to follow up with you afterwards. So if you don't see your question being published, please go off and do that. There's a lot of questions that are really great questions, but they're just not exactly on topic, and we've got so many good ones that are on topic, so we're gonna keep going with that.
Those. Yep.
Yeah. So next one is from Enrico. Adam. Hi, Adam. Always brilliant to see you. About performance. Lately, I've used query diagnostics. It's not very straightforward because it needs to be it needs a lot of manipulation to understand better what delays my queries. Are there any plans to develop it or give it better user experience?
So I would say the team is always looking for ways to improve it. I do know that there was, so once it initially released, there was an update afterwards that did some improvements on it. In terms of what's coming next for that, I'm not aware of anything off the top of my head in terms of improvements on that. Definitely keep specific feedback coming in on how we can make that better. I know the team is always looking for that information and ways to improve that. So hopefully I would say yes, hopefully it does improve and there are updates to it. I don't have any specific information on that though. I'm not aware of anything right now. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm just not aware of it.
Real quick, Adam, there was a clarification on the last one from an anonymous user. It happened to have been Roxanne, and she was actually referring to my workspace.
Okay. Yeah. So in the My Workspace, that's a challenge, right? I feel for you on that because if someone does leave, trying to recover that information right now, you're right. You have to call support because there's no way for a Power BI admin to get access to that. I know I've heard that request from a number of customers saying like it would be great for an admin to actually be able to get access to that. There is nothing that I'm aware of right now in terms of plans to allow for that capability. So I'll make note of that as well. Just say, hey, this did come up. So hopefully maybe someday we'll get something there. Right now, there's nothing planned in the current roadmap. Good feedback though.
So another one from Anonymous, who we now know all Anonymous is Roxanne, right? That's the way that works. My company utilizes both premium node and regular capacity. One of our long-term goals is to be a 100% Power BI premium company without overspending on extra nodes.
Yep.
We know that we will need more than one node. Yes. Are there any tools out there that essentially simulate the premium capacity performance when you migrate reports?
What you need to do is load testing, right? And so there is a PowerShell script out there. I don't have it offhand. I know there was a blog post about it on the Power BI blog. I believe it's like simulate Power BI Premium or Power BI Embedded load. There's a PowerShell script. I don't call that a true load test. It does simulate load, basically by spinning up multiple report browser windows and basically refreshing at intervals. So you can actually crank it up a little bit. But it's not actual like load, like whether you're doing like Visual Studio Web Test or some third-party load test tool that's more accurate. It incorporates think time, things of that nature. But you've got to do load testing to get that information. There's no easy way to simulate that. So it's and also I would say it vastly depends on the reports and data sets as well as also what other load is happening on the capacity. So it's not straightforward. It's not easy, but there are ways to do it. So I hope that helps you. I don't have an easy answer for that outside of try the PowerShell script that does introduce load and see what the behavior is on that. And then past that, you need to look at Visual Studio Web Test, which on the Power BI YouTube channel, it's an older webinar that's there, but just search for Visual Studio Web Test and you'll find it where someone went through and actually showed how you could do that with Power BI Embedded, but it works with Power BI Premium as well.
All right, so the next one here, I'm going to actually try and combine two and see if we can bang out two and one. So Simon and Henry have two similar questions. Simon asks, we observed that rendering performance of reports seems to be dependent on the specs of the user's laptop. An example, a laptop with 4 gigs of RAM is much slower than one with 8 gigs of RAM. The data sources analysis services with live query. And Henry asks, what's the best way to monitor user usage of data sets that are live AS connections? So kind of combine those two. I think we can with one answer.
Yep. So Simon, you're absolutely right. That is a true statement. And if you're running Power BI desktop on a machine with 4 gig of RAM, that's going to be an awful experience. I would also argue that if you only have 8 gigs of RAM, it's probably an awful experience. One thing I did was actually showed with just a bare machine, Power BI desktops running, and just looking at Performance Monitor, there was a significant amount of memory consumed, because the other thing you have to remember is Windows is taking up memory. If you have any other background applications, those are taking up memory, and so you're effectively fighting for resources. My personal recommendation is you should have at least 16 gig of RAM if you're doing anything significant. And even though it's a live connection to AS, there's still items, there's visual caching, there's just overhead of the Power BI desktop itself. There's the queries going back and forth with the data. So it is going to need some resources to do that. And typically also, if you're saying you've only got 4 or 8 gig of RAM, typically that translates to that your CPU itself is probably a weaker CPU. It's not as strong. So that's also contributing to the problem. So you need to make sure that your machine is effective enough to be able to do that type of operation. So like I wouldn't go get Core i3 really low gigahertz with 4 gig of RAM. That's not going to be a good day. The second question, best way to monitor usage or data sets that are live AS connections. So whether it's analysis services on premises or Azure analysis services, SQL Profiler will help you see what those queries are. You could also use a third-party tool like DAX Studio to also capture that information. Basically, you're doing query tracing, and that's going to be at the data source. So if you're doing live connections to AS, the data source is AS. So that's where you need to go trace it.
All right, we're gonna try and wrap in the last two questions here in the last 3 minutes of our time. Awesome. Here, Shiva asks, do you have any performance recommendations when we try to connect large amounts of live data from Power BI? Example, around 10 million records in SAP HANA view.
So I would, first off, I'm going to make a statement that a lot of people are going to go, I consider 10 million rows small data, not large data. Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about SAP HANA or the live direct query piece, your performance is always dependent on the responsiveness of the source. Now with SAP HANA, there's recommendations around how do we make this the most optimal? Using the multidimensional connector is going to perform better than the SQL relational. Just changing that up is going to night and day. There's a lot of performance improvements by doing that. However, it limits you to a single calculated view on the HANA side. So there are pros and cons to that. So typically, if you're dealing with actual large data, then again, 10 million records. Also, for 10 million records, why aren't you importing that? Like, why are we doing live? I understand on the HANA side, you're trying to treat it. It basically is treated like analysis services. You have the calculations. You want to take advantage of the performance on the HANA side. I get that. But from that standpoint, importing that data will be night and day faster. But if you actually truly have like a really large data set, typically when you start working with data at scale, direct query on its own is not going to be performant from an interactive query load that is going to be very chatty. The other thing to take into account is that when you're in direct query or a live connection, each visual on your canvas is going to create one or more queries to the data source. And so that means if you've got 20 visuals on your canvas, that's 20 or more queries per render or per user, right? And so that's also going to introduce load and potentially slow things down. So you got to be mindful about all of that. Yeah.
All right, Adam. that I believe our moderators are giving us that flashing light warning that says that we are we're less than a minute from the end of our session here.
It goes by so quick.
There were so many great questions. Thank you to everybody who submitted. And again, there is a link in the chat. Please go off and submit your questions into that form to make sure that we can get back to you after this as well.
Very much appreciated.
And great job, Adam,
for hanging out with us. I love the interaction. The questions were great. I wish we had more time to go through more, but it was only 30 minutes. And Jason, thanks for helping out.
My pleasure, sir. Thanks for having me.
All right. Enjoy the rest of Ignite and go read up on all the good new features that are out there or coming soon. We'll see you.